Welcome, my friends. Welcome, one and all, to Corbett Report Radio. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and once again, I'm coming to you from the sunny climes of Western Japan, where it is already Thursday afternoon, almost afternoon, 11 a.m. here anyway. And tonight we have a guest lined up for you on everyone's favorite topic, and that is money. Tonight we're going to be talking about monetary policy, and we're going to be talking to Kerry Lutz of the Financial Survival Network at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. And for those of you who haven't visited the Financial Survival Network yet, I suggest you do so, at least to check out some of the stories that they've got covered on their front page right now, including a story from Zero Hedge, There's Something Big Headed Straight for Us, which is a very apt title for, I think, any story on the political, economic, or social scenes these days, unfortunately. Getting a second passport has never been easier. That's an interesting little story right there. Brodsky on gold, credit money, and real return investing. Spain 10-year bond yields approach 7%. Problems continue in Sicily. Compton, California is the next city to file for bankruptcy protection. Ron Paul warns Bernanke the financial crisis is far from over, and unfortunately that is just the bleeding obvious, but unfortunately it does need to be stated time and time again for those out there who want to state otherwise. Gold producers in the catbird seat from the Gold Report. Peter Schiff, this is my single greatest fear. IMF Eurozone in critical danger. ECB should launch QE. Lots and lots and lots of financial stories coming out there on a daily basis. So it is a good source of information on a wide range of subjects. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Kerry Lutz, allow me to read a little bit of his biography from the About page. It says, Kerry Lutz has been a student of Austrian economics since 1977. While attending Pace University, he stumbled upon an extensive cache of Austrian economic literature in a dark, musty, abandoned section of the school's library. After graduating from the New York Law School, he became an attorney and lifelong serial entrepreneur. His diverse career has included running a legal printing company, practicing commercial law and litigation, and founding a successful distressed asset investment company. It goes on from there. I'll let you go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com to read that for yourself and find out a little bit more about Kerry and the Financial Survival Network in general. But yes, I want to start talking about economics today and continue examining the situation that we've arrived in these days, and what an unfortunate situation it is in oh so many respects. And I think that was drawn out quite fruitfully in an interview that Kerry Lutz did recently with the Daily Bell at thedailybell.com. So I'll direct you there. I'll put the link in the show notes for tonight's episode, so you can go there from CorbettReport.com. And read through this interview where they're talking to Kerry about Austrian economics, but also about some of his concerns and how we arrived at the place that we're in. So let me just read a little bit of that. For example, the Daily Bell asked, "What's your major concern?" And Kerry replied that the economic collapse leads to widespread social unrest and eventual anarchy. Anarchy was one of the biggest fears of the Founding Fathers, and we're always just a generation away from losing our freedom, as has been seen many times in the past. To which the Daily Bell asks, how did we get into the fix we're in? And Kerry replies, there were many things that brought us here, but to me the three most key, at least in the U.S., were Prohibition, the 16th Amendment, i.e. income tax, and the Federal Reserve Act. Prohibition was the beginning of the nanny state and so many efforts by government to get us to do the right thing because, of course, government knows what's better for us than we do. Just look at Mayor Michael Nanny Bloomberg and his efforts to outlaw tobacco, trans fats, and double-gulp drinks in New York City, the veritable bastion of state-sponsored nannyism. Well, we are, of course, mortally opposed to state-sponsored nannyism here, so it should be an interesting conversation. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, and tonight we're honored to have on the line Kerry Lutz from the Financial Survival Network. Once again, that's financialsurvivalnetwork.com. So it's great to have him here, and let's bring him straight into the conversation. Kerry, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Hey, well, thank you for having me, James. It's really an honor.
Well, it's good to have you here and to talk about some of the most important issues that I think we can be talking about, which is everyone's economic and financial survival, of course, the Financial Survival Network. So let's start talking about yourself. If this is your first time on the program, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to found the Financial Survival Network.
Sure thing. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur, like third or fourth generation entrepreneur, also a reformed attorney. I always said if I was any good at being an attorney, I wouldn't still be practicing, and finally I got to realize that dream. You know, the crash hit I saw it coming in 2006, 2007, because to me, Vegas would be the epicenter of it. When I saw the real estate market crumbling there and then the stock market getting hit, I knew that I didn't want to be doing what I was doing anymore, which was basically buying and selling distressed assets. And I just saw that we would have massive debt repudiation and that the credit markets would sink. So I said I'd like to try to help people to get through this, because nobody studies the Great Depression or the Great Depressions of the past anymore. They don't teach it in school, and nobody in the United States or throughout most of the world was prepared for what's happening, for what happened then and what's happening now.
Unfortunately not, and I think you're exactly right that we have to understand that we're not in, it is a unique situation in some respects, but in other respects, I mean, we've gone through these types of crises before in human history, and we have to remember how people got through them and what brought them to those places. So let's talk a little bit about that history. I mean, when we look back, of course, the Great Depression of the 30s comes to mind, but we can look even to Roman Republic and other times in history where there have been various types of monetary crises. What do you see as particularly important or instructive episodes in history for our current day and age?
Well, when you have these crises, we're talking major monetary crises and arguably the end of the American empire, but we don't really need to go there to understand this. You always see debasement of the currency. That is, first and foremost, promises get made. There's not enough productive capacity in a country to fulfill them, whether we're talking Rome or Greece or the Byzantine Empire. You go back and you see it happened in Italy, in Venice, and it happens over and over again. Property rights erode, and then society breaks down and it reforms, and I believe that's what we're going through now.
Well, I guess the obvious question, and the one that everyone wants to know, is what is the next stage in this crisis, and what time frame do you think that this is going to be unfolding on? And of course, none of us have a crystal ball, but of course, everyone's interested in how this is all going to unfold.
Yeah, well, as they say with pundits, there's two things you want to do as a pundit. You either want to make a prediction, or you want to give a time frame. You never want to do both together, because you're always going to get tripped up. Now, I would say that that the dollar's preeminence is probably being greatly diminished by the unlimited money printing, but it's happening all over. The interesting thing that's happening in the U.S., and it seems to be accelerating, is this whole energy production meme, which a couple of years ago we were producing 40-odd% of the energy we consume in the United States. Now it's over 50. So we're kind of in a race where will the dollar die before we become, again, the preeminent energy producer in the world? If it holds out for a year or two, we might hit a state of equilibrium if there are major structural changes in the way the government spends money, the benefit structure for recipients, and if changes get made. But if something happens, it could be tomorrow for all we know. You go to the bank and your ATM card doesn't work. And then, you know what, the crisis hit tomorrow instead of 2 years from now, or maybe being put off indefinitely by America's energy renaissance.
Well, let's talk about that energy renaissance. Obviously, this is one of the key issues going forward. It's always been a key issue, I think, for any empire. But of course, going forward in the scramble for resources all across the world, of course, energy resources are right up there as the most important. So what is really driving this increase in local production, domestic production, and what's contributing to that?
Well, let's talk about what isn't contributing to it first, and that is the government, because the government and these busybodies in all the different agencies have done everything they can to try to destroy the domestic energy industry in the U.S. in many ways. I mean, maybe not destroy, maybe that's the wrong word, but intervene. And yet, the amazing thing to me, James, is that in spite of all their efforts, this sector is flourishing and is going to become preeminent. And I wasn't really sure of it, but I'm seeing it now that we're producing over 50%, close to 55% of the country's energy needs. So it's technology. It is the fact that the U.S. was the most explored country in the world for energy. So they knew about all these resources, the shale gas, the shale oil, but not oil that's locked in shale rock, but rather reservoirs that they can get to through horizontal drilling. And they knew all about it. They were just waiting for the technology to be there to exploit it. Now, some people say we're just trying to exploit the rest of the world's oil, drive their reserves down, and we always knew we were going to tap into it. I'm not buying that for the simple reason that the oil that's being tapped now, the natural gas liquid, which is another market that virtually nobody except insiders in the industry know about, all of that is the result of a quiet revolution that took place over the last 15 or so years with people risking capital the old American way, risking having an idea for a better mousetrap, going there and making it work. And that's what's been happening here, in spite of all of the government's attempts to somehow find the green panacea of energy that at the present time doesn't exist.
Well, that to me is the overriding narrative that we've seen in the last several years, and of course, certainly during the Obama presidency, has been the drive for the green energy, and of course, all of the scandals that inevitably fall out of that. And we've seen the farce, really, that the wind power industry has become and has always been from its inception, really. And we look at things like Solyndra, so it just seems to be scandal after scandal, and unfortunately, that's what seems to be coming out of it. But of course, the other side of that is the people who are arguing that government intervention and the government drive to create this green energy industry, the green economy is going to be the savior of humanity. So it seems to me there's a huge ideological battle being won. How do you see that ideological battle playing out, and do you think that which side of that is winning at this moment?
Well, let's go look at something real simple like ethanol. It has no business being mixed into gasoline. You get worse mileage from it. It takes food out of the international food market, raises prices, causes food riots on the other side of the world, and it's strictly there as a giveaway, a subsidy to big agribusiness. And I won't name names, we all know who they are. So this is what happens when the government picks winners and losers. And not only do they have to subsidize the producers to make it, but then they have to erect trade barriers so that we can't get cheaper ethanol from places like Brazil that make it out of sugar cane, which probably are better off having less sugar in the world, according to these anti-obesity types. But the point is, when the government intervenes and they pick winners and losers, they're not smart enough to know who the right winner should be. The market's much better at picking winners and losers based on efficiency rather than based on political connections, campaign contributions, and the whims of some pointy-headed bureaucrat locked in a cubicle in the middle of one of those 3-block-long buildings in Washington, D.C.
But, Kerry, we can't allow the corporations to run away with the world. It's the 99% versus the 1%. And as we all know, the government is the only one that can keep that 1% constrained, right?
Well, the 1% exist because of the government. Milton Friedman used to say, show me any monopoly that you can think of, and I'll show you a monopoly that got there because of the government. All of these fascist corporations, and there's thousands of them, I guess, around the world, they all got there because government granted them unfair advantage. They granted them franchises. They granted them special privileges not available to you or to me, James. And getting government out of there would quickly the inefficient producers would lose out. They'd go out of business. And part of this is theoretical, but part of it is true. A company like Solyndra would never have gone into business because the free market wouldn't have allowed it. Nobody would have loaned their money. The fact that they were in business in the first place function of the government.
Welcome back to the broadcast, friends. You are tuned into Corbett Report Radio here on republicbroadcasting.org. Tonight we're talking to Kerry Lutz of the Financial Survival Network. So tonight we're talking about various economic and financial matters and lots to talk about, obviously, in this collapsing economy. And it is an economic crisis in every sense of the word. But as Kerry points out in that Daily Bell interview that I was referencing at the beginning of tonight's episode, unfortunately, economic concerns also always play into social concerns and the broader picture of society at large. And really, when we face economic collapse, we are facing not just a financial problem, but really the breakdown of social cohesion as we've known it in our lifetime. So it is the type of problem that does start to spill over onto the streets in many different ways. So, Kerry, let's talk a little bit about that point. You say that the prospect of social collapse and anarchy is one of the concerns that you see playing out from this economic disaster. Perhaps you can elaborate on that.
Well, look at modern life today. You can't live without commerce. And if the trucks stop rolling down the highways, delivering goods, delivering food, delivering all the essentials that you and I need to live modern existence, then we've got a big problem. And social order, once the food is off the shelves in the supermarkets, most people are 15 meals away from starvation. That's the most you could find in your home unless you're prepping. And don't get me wrong, James, I'm not advocating ultra prepping, but we saw it in so many places where natural disasters have hit, no food left in the supermarkets. So you never know where you are, whether you could be subject to a natural disaster. So it's always a good idea to have a few weeks worth of food on hand at least, as well as the essentials.
I can't imagine why anyone wouldn't want that. I mean, you refer to ultra prepping, but what does that even mean? How could you be too prepared for something?
Well, I'm kind of making a joke about that National Geographic show, Extreme Preppers, where they've got bunkers drilled, and they've got years of food and air filters to keep out the fallout dust and all that. There's a limit to what you can prepare for. Let's face it. We're limited by practicality. We're limited by our inability to really know what's going to happen in the future. But having a couple months supply of food on hand that you're drawing down on and constantly replacing just makes so much sense. And yet, James, most people don't do it. Just like having some gold and silver in your possession should money become, shall we say, scarce, or should paper money cease to exist? Or let's say you were a depositor at BNI or RBS and they had a bank glitch and you had no funds and no family and no friends to go to. How would you survive for that 30 days that BNI has been closed, or the 2 or 3 weeks that Royal Bank of Scotland and NatWest and Ulster Bank had their so-called glitch? You need to be prepared on a number of fronts for a number of different possible scenarios, understanding that you cannot prepare for every single one.
Well, that is the point, and I think even regardless of any greater economic context of what we're living through, I think people should be prepared for any sort of eventuality like that, because it could happen at any time. So absolutely, I'm completely in agreement on that. But let me tease out some of the points. For example, in that Daily Bell interview, you used the term anarchy. Anarchy was one of the biggest fears of the Founding Fathers. And coming from someone who who cannot see a problem, the answer to which should be government, I'm not sure why anarchy is really used in a pejorative sense there.
Well, the problem is we've seen in history limited government can work and be very effective. I can't think of anarchical societies that have been successful. Now, one could argue that as the country was developed, there really wasn't governmental structures in many of the new territories, and it leads to certain problems. So my personal belief is there is a certain minimal amount of government that just makes life easier and more productive But keeping that government limited, that's the challenge. And we have not learned the lessons of history here in the United States or in any other country in the world about limited government. So theoretically, anarchy might be a workable system, but I haven't ever really seen it happen other than in the frontiers. And one could argue in parts of Alaska, they're pretty close to anarchy because, one Alaskan state trooper will be responsible for an area the size of New Jersey, and there's just no way it can be policed.
Well, I would counter by saying that limited government is the thing that I've never actually seen. And for the short periods of time where something corresponding to that has happened or taken place, it's inevitably devolved into even worse tyranny. And we can look at the American example. Whatever the founding fathers have set up, it has devolved to a point where it would be absolutely unrecognizable to them. So I think there's more of a philosophical point to be made about whether limited government is itself a pipe dream that's sold as a way to step people along towards greater tyranny. But on that note, we're heading up against another break, so let's leave it there. We'll be back in a few minutes here talking to Kerry Lutz of the Financial Survival Network. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
To hear part 2 of this interview, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. That's the place where it'll be available. Again, part 2 of this interview, financialsurvivalnetwork.com.